they would actually wish to have.
I certainly don't doubt that's a possibility. This is really interesting because this has a bearing on this whole PR-AV question. Because the difference between AV, coalition under AV, and coalition under PR, is that PR, in virtue of giving a whole load of seats to relatively not well-supported parties, who may end up with seats in Parliament. We could imagine, for example, a rainbow coalition in our Parliament of Labour, Liberal Democrats, Plaid Cymru, SNP, the Green Party, maybe an Northern Ireland Party. All these smaller parties, having to keep them happy. You do end up, I wouldn't disagree with some Malcolm, you do end up somewhat at the mercy of those smaller parties. And it's why I have a big question mark over PR. AV doesn't necessarily do that because it's not proportional. It doesn't guarantee small parties representation in Parliament. It does mean that you will probably need at least two parties to be able to form a government. And at the moment, though, as Sir Malcolm has spent a long time pointing out and trying to explain, it's not necessarily going to stay the case that new parties can arise. At the moment, the three biggest parties are Labour, Liberal Democrats and Conservatives. And so it's two of those three, if not all three together in some grand national coalition, that are going to form a coalition. And it means that under AV, it's far less likely you're going to be held at the mercy of these smaller parties. And why I would also dispute your claim in your speech at the beginning, where you said that the Dems could have chosen to have some kind of coalition with Labour. I don't think they could have done, because the electoral arithmetic stopped it. That you have to have a majority of seats in the Commons. There was no way to get a majority, not even with Plaid Cymru and SNP. And nobody wanted to do that because of the economic difficulties. We needed to get the country's finances under control. We didn't want to be at the mercy of Scottish and Welsh nationalists wanting to preserve money for their various projects. So I think actually, going back to your very original point of accountability, there was a sense in which the only option for Liberal Democrats was to do a deal with the Conservatives. And I think that is the result of how the electorate voted. I think it's an expression of how people voted last year, and I think that's why people are broadly happy with the coalition, according to opinion polls at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Another question, please. Yes?
One argument that's been used by both sides seems to depend on the possible relation between AV and coalition governments. Now, I take it this is an entirely empirical claim. The opposite might be the case. So if any weight is going to be given to either argument, either for or against AV, one really does need to be given evidence that AV will tend to make coalition government more or less likely. Now, I mean, maybe such evidence simply isn't available because voting patterns would be so different once AV comes in. But I'm surprised that I thought one would see a lot in the press, rather speculative descriptions of how elections in the past would have been different, and I've seen very little of it. But one generalisation I've heard this evening, I had heard before, is that AV tends in fact to exaggerate general swings of mood. And that would actually mean that Labour, as we said, Labour would become entering the parliamentary state. Now, clearly there would have been some predecessor to 2010, but how long ago would this have been? And if such a question isn't answerable, then it seems that we actually have to look at other arguments and not the coalition government.
Well, if I make a brief point on that, I think that there's a view supported by quite a lot of evidence that more people, when they're voting, vote against the parties they don't want than for the party they do. Fear is more a motive of voting than enthusiasm. It's a generalization, but as a generalization I think it's valid. And if it's valid as a generalization, then it stands to argument that if you have any system of either AV or PR, the middle of the road party, so-called, which in Britain's case would be the Liberal Democrats, either to the right or to the left, but somewhere in the middle, would benefit from a second preference or a PR system of voting. And indeed that's what the Liberal Democrats believe, which is why they're so enthusiastic for electoral reform. It's historically very interesting that right up till the beginning of the 20th century, the Labour Party, which was a very small party at the time, was in favour of PR. The Liberals, despite being in government most of the time under Gladstone or Asquith or Lloyd George, never introduced it. It was only when the public had changed their allegiance and the Liberal Democrats became the third party that they rediscovered the virtues of PR or electoral reform, and the Labour Party suddenly lost interest in it. So that is the political reality. And it's not hard evidence, because we're talking about how millions of people will behave on a particular day when they go to the polling station. But I think I think one can be pretty confident that that would be the main thrust, and it's certainly what the politicians in all three parties believe.
Thank you. Matt, do you have a response?
Yeah, I would just say that there has been, I don't have any data available, but there has been lots of studies, I think, suggesting that coalition government would be more likely under AV. I mean, I'm not making I want to be clear, I'm not making an argument saying, please vote for AV because it delivers coalitions. Because as I have tried to make clear, there is no in principle reason why it would do that. Though I think in reality, being honest, that it probably would at least sometime, I think for the reasons that Malcolm has laid out. I'm just trying to say, contrary to Sir Malcolm, that coalitions aren't necessarily a bad thing, actually I think they're quite good. And on the point that Sir Malcolm makes regarding the Liberal switching the view, which I imagine is entirely historically accurate, one thing is the Liberals have been in opposition for a very long time, until last year. I think the mood has changed in the last 60 years. I think that the Liberal SDP alliance, which was the predecessor to the Liberal Democrats in the 1980s, living under Margaret Thatcher, I think that really solidified. I think there's absolutely no question. It's a very much an in-principle view held in Liberal Democrat circles that this is the right thing to do to go down that road, which is why I'm such a heretic in my own party for not automatically signing up to PR, because I think there are various questions.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. John?
Just as a sort of quick one, almost playing devil's advocate, really. A lot of this seems to be focusing on, oh, it would be a little bit better if we did this or that. But a lot of it almost seems to be wanting to make a change that's a bit fast for it. I mean, in principle, I feel that any change in politics needs to be worked at hard, and I think any change in the political system from two-party to three-party, or the third party coming up, like the Liberal Democrats are, and gaining influence, should be done more through hard graft from the politicians, making people vote for them because they're the best candidate for the best government, as opposed to the middle-of-the-road candidate that most people wouldn't hate so much. So my question is the question sort of misdirected for electoral reform, and should it be more for politicians working harder to support their party?
Matt, would you like to begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a couple of points. I mean, regarding the appetite for reform, and sort of I think you suggested that maybe the reform's going a bit quickly in light of Lib Dem's recent success and what have you. I think there's been an appetite, a large number of people for a very long time for some kind of reform in this country. Not in the Labour and Conservative parties, okay, because they benefit from the current system. Though it's really telling that half, well, I don't know exactly which means, but a sizable portion, about half of the Labour Party, is campaigning for the yes side, even though it benefits them, because they're taking the principal stance. And I'm actually quite proud of Ed Miliband for taking that principal stance, because it would have been very easy for him to just bash Nick Clegg over the head by going an argument for a no. Regarding working hard, I mean, working hard is important. I believe, I agree with that, you have to work to convince people to vote for you. The point is, however, that, as I said earlier, I do think there are safeties, and I think that a lot of MPs, people aspiring to be MPs, don't work very hard. In fact, evidence was published on Sunday that showed that MPs who represent safe seats, on average, earn nearly double the amount from outside parliamentary work than MPs in marginal seats. Those MPs actually have to work to get elected, rather than just being the candidate for whichever party always gets elected because of the local demographics. They spend far less of their time in Parliament. They earn lots of money doing other things, consultancy, etc. And I think AV would actually, enforcing whoever wins to get 50%, therefore having to reach out more, will actually force them to work harder to get your vote, give you a stronger stake. That's the argument the Yes campaign are winning. Not winning. I hope they're winning. that's the argument the Yes campaign are fighting, and have been fighting since the beginning of this.
Can I just make a sort of corollary clarification on that, being on my question at least? A lot of the statements that both the speakers have made is that of which parties would benefit most under AV and which wouldn't at this stage. But there's been not so much talk about which people, what actual people in the electorate would benefit. And I think that the direction that the MPs should be taking is not to sort of give the illusion of a better system, but actually working harder to promote what's a better choice as opposed to a better way of choosing.
So, Mark, would you like to respond?
I think the vast majority of MPs in all parties work incredibly hard. I don't accept your premise that somehow there's some difference between MPs who have safe seats and those who don't. I can be described as having a safe seat because I've got 51% of the vote. I'm in Parliament pretty well every day of the week. I have at the moment in my files cases, some 2,000 to 3,000 cases of constituents whom we are helping at the moment. I do all the things that other members of Parliament do, and I don't accept this assumption. I think it's a wicked assumption, because there are some good MPs and there are some lousy MPs. There are many lousy MPs from safe seats, and there are many lousy MPs from seats that are very marginal, who are just lazy and indifferent. But the opposite also applies. And it's for the electorate, knowing their local MP, and coming to a judgment whether he or she is any good, to decide whether to keep them or throw them out. And that applies in every constituency in the land. Because it's not just whether you would be bound to win it or not. If your premise was correct, MPs in safe seats would still see their majorities dramatically falling, even if they still were elected, if their reputations were poor. And that doesn't tend to happen.
Okay, just to come back on that, I first of all would like to clarify I wasn't in any way intending to insult you.
I'm not suggesting you would, I'm using an example.
My view of this, I mean, I was quoting statistics. I mean, the figure here is clear, 11,000 on average, people in safe seats earning from extra parliamentary work, and 6,500 on average MPs in marginals. That's just the figures. But my view is also fortunate experience. Before I moved to London to study here at Heythrop, I lived in a place called Gosport, and Gosport's MP was Sir Peter Biggers. Many of you might recognise the name. Why? Because he was the Duck House MP. He's the guy who came from the Duck House. And when I first became sort of politically aware around 14, 15, 16, and I joined the Liberal Democrats at that time, and I got to know local circumstances, I saw some figures. He spent about 37% of his time in Parliament. That's it. And he sat on about 20 dozen, or I don't know how many, about 20, between 20 and a dozen different boards, various different companies, earning a sizable penny, I'm sure. Now, of course, Sir Malcolm is right that there are bad MPs and there are good MPs, and he may have just been a typical example of a bad MP. I do, however, think if you have to spend a bit more time thinking, and I don't mean to, it's hard making this argument with an MP for a associate sat next to me, very close to me. I don't mean to suggest that Sir Malcolm, just because he is a associate MP, doesn't work hard. But I do think that MPs who might be inclined to take their positions for granted, and we all know that there are lots of them who do, those MPs might have to think twice. In every seat in the country, every single seat, they have to get 50% of the vote. They have to reach out to you. And answer to your question, John, I hope I haven't made a case just suggesting that I want the sorry. It's fine. I hope I haven't made a case just saying that it's going to benefit certain parties. The point I'm trying to make is this, hopefully, will benefit everyone. It will benefit the voters more than anyone else. Because at the end of the day, the point I made with the chocolate bar wasn't supposed to be a joke. I mean, if you go and make a choice, it's like you're asking a friend to pick up something for you from the shop. You don't say to them, I'll have a cake, and then that's it. You know, can they come back and say, I didn't have a cake, so I didn't get anything. You say, I'd have a cake. If they have a cake, I'll get a Pepsi. If they have a Pepsi, maybe a Dr. Pepper. We take these choices for granted. In every other area of public policy, every single other area, all the parties want to give people more choice in NHS, in schools, everything. Why is it that MPs don't want to give us more choice when it comes to elections? Because that's what we're talking about. Instead of just putting an X, you get to put 1, 2, 3, and I completely reject this argument it's complicated. It's not complicated at all. It is as easy as 1, 2, 3.
Right. I will now invite both speakers to sum up their arguments. They'll have between 2 and 5 minutes each, and they'll speak in the same order as they initially spoke. So, Matt, if you'd like to start us off.
Actually, I made sure there was a microphone today because I had a bad throat, but I'm feeling okay. So, hopefully won't need it. I'm not going to fiddle around. Yes, as I just said, I hope the case I've made today has made it clear that I'm not interested in benefiting any particular party. I'm not in principle in favour of AV because it's benefit the Liberal Democrats. There's a very good case to be made that it won't benefit the Liberal Democrats, actually. Because the Liberal Democrats, in those constituencies in which they elect MPs like mine, they do very well on saying to people, this is a two-horse race. You have to elect either us or the other guy, whichever the other guy is, either Labour or the Tories, depending on the circumstances. And this will stop them, as well as the other two parties, from being able to make parliament. So it may actually hurt the Libertarians, and I think that my party has failed to realise that. They need to think about it more. The point I'm trying to make is just this. The system we have now, it makes sense, lots of sense, if you have two parties. If you live in America, this is the thing about America. The USA has two parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And every other party, of which I can only name one, the Libertarian Party, I think there might be a Green Party as well, it is miles behind both those two. And there is a genuine two-party state in the USA that we don't have here anymore. We used to, because though the Liberal Party has been, lying around for the last 90 years or so, since the Labour Party overtook them as the second party, it's been almost non-existent in parliamentary terms, at least until the 1980s, and didn't really recover properly until the 1990s. So it's only very recently that we've moved into this sort of strange territory. We have more than two parties. And now we have more than this. You have the Green Party winning a seat, you have UKIP making inroads, even the English Democrats and various other parties have sprung up. I want us, as voters, as citizens of this country, to be able to say, this is what I want. And if I can't have that, I love this. And if I can't have that, I love this. It's really simple. Really simple. And it stops, as Sir Malcolm himself has admitted, it stops this need that people have to always vote against something. Why do we have to be so negative? Why not vote for something? This is what AIM gives us, that opportunity to vote for something. And regarding coalitions, I would just reiterate that coalition government is no, in principle, bad thing. I think it's very good in lots of ways. I think that having to argue with your political opponents every single day on every single decision is probably a good thing. It stops this sense of right to govern from creeping in too much, and stops bad things from happening. Not always, it's in the case of Israel, but certainly under AV, the types of coalitions formed won't probably include very small parties with a disproportionately loud voice. So AV, while not a perfect system, is at least an improvement on what we have now. It requires that MPs get at least 50% of the vote to be elected, enough to have to really reach out to the electorate. It gives people the chance to vote for what they want, and not just what they are forced to accept. It opens up the door to a more pluralistic politics, where more than just 2 or 3 parties dominate. It opens up the door to a more representative, mandated, but also properly restricted government. That's what I mean by coalitions, properly restricted. And it does this without confusing the voter, giving him or her any more than what they take for granted in asking a friend to go by, a martyr or volcano. Please, vote yes.
The arguments that you've heard proceed from certain assumptions which I've just asked you to consider whether they are even basically valid. First of all, the assumption that somehow members of parliament work harder based on the electoral system that has elected them in the first place. Now, you take the 60 Liberal Democrat MPs. Most of them were first elected on very small shares of the total vote, and they just edged ahead of Labour or Conservative. Most of them are pretty good local MPs. Some of them now have safe seats. Are they working less hard now they've got safe seats? Is Simon Hughes now much less active a member of Parliament than he was when he first won the seat because his majority has become so big? That's an absurd argument. It just doesn't apply. There are good MPs, there are bad MPs in all parties. Whether they work hard, whether they take for granted the electorate, depends on their personality. Not whether, if I got 40% of the vote as opposed to 51%, it wouldn't change the way I operated as an MP, nor would it in the case of any other member. That is the wrong premise. Second premise you make is that somehow, it's implicit in all the arguments, is that our present electoral system is unfair to the smaller parties, to the third parties, to other parties that ought to be making a bigger contribution to parliamentary strength in the House of Commons. I hope I've illustrated that it simply doesn't work like that historically. That the Liberal Democrats 30 years ago had 10 seats in the House of Commons. They now have 60. It is entirely possible they could have 160 under first past the post in 5-10 years' time. I know the current opinion polls don't suggest that, but there's nothing in the system that prevents it. Whether it happens or not will depend on whether the electorate, who have increasingly voted Lib Dem in the last 30 years, whether that process continues. And I used the example of the Labour Party overtook the Liberal Democrats permanently, as it seems, with first past the post. Carolyn Lucas is the Green MP in Brighton. because that's the way the people of Brighton chose to vote. So, if the argument that it affects the behaviour of an individual MP is entirely hypothetical, it's not based on any evidence of any substance at all. And if small parties, third parties, can, if they win votes, win seats, and that does happen, and it has happened, and there's a third consideration as well, which hasn't been mentioned this evening, that one of the changes in the last 30 years is not just that more people vote for third parties, it is also that Britain has become less of an ideological divide. The Conservative Party has become less right-wing. The Labour Party has become less socialist. And the ideological differences between Labour, Conservative and Liberal Democrat are far less profound than they used to be. And one of the consequences of that is there are far fewer people who only vote for one party in their whole lives. When I first went into politics in the 1970s, probably 70% of the electorate always voted Labour or Conservative. Now, 90% will change their vote in a by-election or in a certain election if they feel strongly enough. My final comment, and I use it as an illustration. I remember when a by-election was about to happen in this country about 25, 30 years ago, when Lord Hilston was chairman of the Conservative Party, Quinton Hogg, as he became. And the Labour majority at the previous election had been 20,000. And he was asked on television, what do you think the Tories' prospects are? He said, oh, I think very, very good. It's a marginal seat. And he said, the interviewer said, how can it possibly be marginal if the Labour majority at the last election was 20,000? And I've never forgotten his reply. He said, all seats are marginal. The only difference is the size of the margin. And that was partly true when he said it. It's become much more true now. You only have to look at what happens at by-elections when governments are unpopular and what might have been described as a particularly safe seat. The incumbent gets thrown out and another party wins. So the only justification for changing our electoral system, which has stood us pretty well for a very long period, is if there was hard evidence of real improvement. I don't think anything we've heard this evening, or indeed in the campaign, suggests that. I think all the indication is that the electorate have come to the same view if the opinion surveys are correct. And I think if you want to see the electoral system changed, you actually have to go back and find hard arguments, not theoretical ones, as to why that would correspond to the real public interest.
Thank you very much to both of you. Before we close, I think it might be interesting to take a quick show of hands.
Can we have it on the alternative vote? First preference and the second preference.
This obviously won't necessarily be as to how you're voting tomorrow, because obviously I wouldn't ask you that. But simply as to who you have found more persuasive in the debate this evening. So could I have a show of hands firstly for those who have found Matt's argument for the yes position more persuasive? Thank you. And a show of hands for those of you who have found Sir Malcolm's. Thank you very much, that's very interesting. On behalf of the audience, I'd like to thank both of our speakers for a really interesting and enlightening debate this evening. I really hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've found it informative and maybe helpful in your decision on how to vote in the referendum tomorrow. Thank you all very much for coming. Please don't forget to vote tomorrow.